A großen Dank. Thank you so much, Reb Nuchem. Thank you. Psachim Daf Yutes Amud Aleph. We're holding 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 lines from the top. So, the Gemara, after a long and complex discussion, concluded that Rabbi Yossi disagrees with Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva disagrees with Rabbi Yossi. Meaning, Rabbi Yossi, who says that Tumah travels till Shlishi when it comes to Truma, and till Revi when it comes to Karbonis, not more, which means Tumah could come to Rishon, Tumah can become a Sheni, Tumah can be a Shlishi if it's Truma, and Tumah can be a Revi if it's Karbonis, but not more. He can't agree with Rabbi Akiva. Because if he would agree with Rabbi Akiva, who told us Yitma Yitame, that Sheni makes a Shlishi even by Chulin, his Kal V'Chaima would have to take us all the way to Chamishi. The fact that he stops by Revi means he holds that Chulin stops by Sheni. On the other hand, Rabbi Akiva also doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi, because if Rabbi Akiva would agree with Rabbi Yossi's Kal V'Chaima, that he is employed, Rabbi Akiva himself would have to take Karbonis till Chamishi. Rabbi Akiva would have to say that Truma can be a Revi and Karbonis could become a Chamishi. Because if Rabbi Yossi's Kal V'Chomer is an authentic Kal V'Chomer, one to be employed, so Rabbi Akiva should take that Kal V'Chomer and extrapolate it and expand it and say that Truma can become a Revi and Karbonis could become a Chamishi. Rabbi Akiva did not say that. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva must completely reject Rabbi Yossi's Kal V'Chomer. We explained why he would reject his Kal V'Chomer, because a Tvul Yom and Mechusar Kippurim could be Avatumas, and therefore Rabbi Akiva does not agree with Reb Yossi, even though Rabbi Akiva holds that a Shlishi can be Truma. That's true. But why can a Shlishi be Truma? Because Yitma Yitame. Even Chulin could be a Shlishi. And Rabbi Akiva holds Karbonis can be a Revi, but not because of Kal V'Chomer. He has a pasuk, Habasar Asher Yiga B'chol Tamei Lo Yeyachel, and Shlishi is a Tamei, and Karbonis that touch anything that's Tamei get burnt, but he doesn't need any Kal V'Chomers. The question now is, how do we know that Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold that there's Revi by Truma and Chamishi by Karbonis? How do we taka know? Maybe he taka holds from the Kal V'Chomer and does take Tumah further. Maybe he does. On this, Reb Ashi said to Reb Kahana, Reb Kahana said to Reb Ashi, because we don't have anywhere in Shas that anybody should say that Truma can be a Revi and Kodesh could be a Chamishi. If Rabbi Akiva really holds from the Kal V'Chomer, he should have had that opinion. And there should be some mention of it. And then when you'll ask, who can say such a thing? We should say Rabbi Akiva, but we don't have that anywhere. Why is there no Mishnah and Braisa that gives us any hint that there is Chamishi by Karbonis and Revi by Truma? Why not? The answer is obviously because there's no such an opinion. Why is there no such an opinion? Because Rabbi Akiva doesn't acknowledge the Kal V'Chomer of Rabbi Yossi, and therefore he holds that there's no Revi by Truma and there's no Chamishi by Kodesh. This is what Reb Kahana told Reb Ashi. When Reb Ashi asked Reb Kahana, I can prove that Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold like Rabbi Akiva, but how can you prove Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi? Maybe he does. So Reb Kahana said, because there's no source for it. So Reb Ashi responds now and refutes this. I don't understand you. Va'anan ahachi nekum v'nismoich. You see where we are? Va'anan ahachi, the line starts he, va'anan. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 from the top, Yud Aleph. Va'anan, and we, ahachi on this. Nekum, we should stand up, v'nismoich, we should rely on this. I don't understand. Because you haven't seen mentioned, you came to a pretty bold conclusion the Rabbi Akiva rejects the Kal V'chomer of Rabbi Yossi? You could say, I don't have a source that Rabbi Akiva says it explicitly. But how could you come and make a statement that Rabbi Akiva rejects Rabbi Yossi? Why? Because you haven't seen anywhere that it says Rabbi Akiva holds Chamishi B'Kodesh. Maybe this wasn't recorded. For whatever reason, it wasn't recorded. You could say, I don't know, we have to debate it. How could you come and make a statement, Rabbi Akiva rejects Rabbi Yossi, when you have no source for it? You're basically saying it doesn't say anywhere Rabbi Akiva holds from Chamishi. Okay, doesn't say. But it also doesn't say that he doesn't know. If you would say somewhere, Rabbi Akiva says there's no Chamishi B'Kodesh and there's no Revi B'Truma, you'd say, why not? Why doesn't he hold from Rabbi Yossi's Kal V'chomer? Obviously, he rejects the Kal V'chomer of Rabbi Yossi. But that doesn't happen. You just don't have a source that anybody says Chamishi B'Kodesh. So from this, you can't make such a bold statement that he's arguing with Rabbi Yossi.
Unless it's a swore.
Huh?
Unless it's a swore.
Right, but we see Rabbi Yossi has the Kal V'chomer. So there's certainly a svara to say the Kal V'chomer. So you could say Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold from the Kal V'chomer, gesund to hate. But how can you rely on this? Anana hachi nekem v'nismich, and say that Rabbi Akiva mamish does not hold from it. You can't make such a chiddush. This is how Reb Ashi questions Reb Kahana. In the words of Rashi, v'anan hachi nismich. I know there's still a very long Rashi, but we're going to do that at the end of the sugya because it'll be clear. But the Rashi after the long Rashi, v'anan hachi nismich mishum deloy ashkich and tana name Rabbi Akiva leslie Kal V'chomer. Because you don't find a Tana who says this, you're coming to a conclusion that Rabbi Akiva rejects the Kal V'chomer. Nafak Reb Ashi, says the Gemara, Reb Ashi went out. V'iteimer Reb Kahana. Others say it was not Reb Ashi, it was Reb Kahana. And duck. He began to be medayik. He began to search to, the word duck comes, mediyuk, comes from the word we say every morning, hadek hetev. When it came to the herbs of incense, right? Torah says hadek, you have to grind it up, smash it up well, which is basically a metaphor for dissecting something. When you break it apart into the little pieces, you dissect. That's why we say you're being medayik. You have to be medayik. You have to take it apart, like get into the nitty gritty of it. The smallest particles, right? Nafak Reb Ashi went out, v'itemer Reb Kahana, some say it was Reb Kahana, and duck. He went looking, so to speak. It doesn't mean he went out physically, geographically. He went out of his town. But like we say in the Haggadah, we say, Tsei Olmad. Go out and learn. Go out where? I should leave my house? No, it's going out of your comfort zone. All learning means going out. It's very interesting. It's about Nafak Reb Ashi. He didn't go out anywhere. How do you know he went out? I mean, maybe he went to the forest to meditate. I don't know. It wasn't Nafak Reb Ashi. He went. He had to go out of his kalim. In other words, all learning is going out. You have to say, Tsei Olamat, come out. Tsei Olamat, go out of your previous assumptions. And look, you have to look for something new. You have to go to new places that you didn't go before. Spiritually speaking. Nafak Reb Ashi v'temer Reb Kahana, and duck. And he started to be medayik, to search Taka, what Rabbi Akiva holds. Because when Rava makes a statement, Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi, Rava knows what he's saying. Rava doesn't stand aside, Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi. But we have to find it, we have to search it. So they're now trying to search. Remember, there's no Google, there's nothing. How can we figure out what Rabbi Akiva says, what Rabbi Akiva holds? Va'ashkech. And Rab Ashi or Reb Kahana found. What they find? Haditnan. They found a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah, Meseches Chagiga, Daf Chaf Amud Beis. And the Mishnah speaks about the stringencies of karbonos versus truma. Both are holy foods. Both are not allowed to become impure. Both, if they become impure, you're not allowed to eat it anymore. Truma. Truma is the tithing that I give to the kohen from my fruits, from my vegetables, from my produce, my grain, and it becomes truma. It becomes holy, sacred food that only a kohen is allowed to eat. A kohen and his wife and his children and his servants, his family can eat it, and everyone who's part of his household. But a Yisrael can't eat it, a Levi can't eat it. It's sacred food, it's called truma. That food is not allowed to become tameh. If it becomes tameh, the kohen can't eat it anymore. He has to burn it, he has to use it for fuel. He can use it for fuel, but he can't eat it anymore. That's truma. But then there's something even more holy, which is called kodesh. Kodesh is the sacred food of sacrifices, of a karbonos. Whether it's the carbon pesach, any carbon shlamim, any carbon that's eaten, whether by Yisraelim or by Kayanim, that's called Kodesh. So the Mishnah in Chagiga discusses the stringencies of Kodesh versus Truma when it comes to the laws of purity and impurity. And the Mishnah says as follows: Hakeli mitzarif es masha b'toichai lekodesh avaloi letruma. A vessel, a keli, combines that which is inside of it when it comes to Kodesh, but not when it comes to Truma. Let me explain what the Mishnah is saying. I have, let's say, a big tray or a big bowl, okay? And I have 2 bulkalach, 2 pieces of challah, both Truma, both a kohen. He took your grain, he grinded the wheat into flour, he kneaded the flour with water, and he baked challah. And I have a challah here on one side of the tin, one side of the tray, one side of the bowl, and another challah here. This challah became tameh. How did it become tameh? Let's say a dead sheretz fell on the challah. It's tameh. Okay. It's not touching the other challah. It's on one side of the tray, it's on the other side of the tray. The other challah is not affected. The other challah is completely fine. This challah is tameh. The other challah is not tameh. That's fine.
So you get tameh from the tray?
Ah?
So you get tameh from the tray?
You want that the second challah should become tameh from the tree. Okay. You're forgetting. Can a keli be metame oichel? Never. A keli could never be metame oichel, right? A keli could not. Never. A keli can't be metame oichel. No such a thing. Also not. Even with the Rabbanon, a keli will never transfer tumah to food. It can't. There's no such a thing. No connectivity. Yeah. Oh yeah, I stand corrected. I'm sorry. Oichel can't be metame keli. Sorry. I stand corrected. Oichel can't be metame a keli. So that bulkala will not transfer tumah to a keli. Remember, a keli and an adam can only become tummy from an av hatumah. Okay. Now, midirabbanon on adam could be tummy from other things, but a keli not. So mele the bulkala that's tummy could never be metame the keli. A keli could be metame oichel. That's what we're learning, right? The sheretz that falls into a keli, and then the food in the keli becomes tummy from the keli. But oichel can't be metame a keli, because a keli can only become tummy from an av hatumah. Meaning, a sheretz touches the keli is tummy. But a sheretz touches oichel, which touches a keli. An oichel is never an av hatumah, and it cannot be metame kelim. An oichel could be a rishon. An oichel is not an av hatumah, and therefore it's not metame kelim ever. Now, mashke, midayrais is also not metame kelim, but the Rabbanon said that mashke could be metame a keli. And the reason is because there is a type of mashke that's an av hatumah. The saliva of a zav is an av hatumah. So the Chachamim said that all mashke that's tameh should be metame kelim, even if it's not an av hatumah, because we're afraid that you could get confused with a real av hatumah where the keli is tameh. So they made a gzera that mashkin is metame. But oichel could never be an av hatumah. You can't get food that's a source of tumah. Food cannot be a source of tumah. It's not a source of tumah. Food is not a source of tumah. So there's never a situation where oichel should transfer tumah to kelim. So if this bulkala of truma is tameh, the keli that it touches is not becoming tameh. Even if a bulka touched a mace, that's a good question. So anything that touches a mace, l'cha'ira becomes an avatuma, right? So even if you want to say that the oichel is considered an avatuma, it's considered an avatuma at best, and the Rishonim argue about this, that if it touches another mashka, that mashka will be a rishon. But in terms of a keli that it touches, it's not considered an av, it's called a rishon. And therefore, right, that keli will not become tameh from touching an oichel that touched the mace. You understand what I'm saying? Even if you want to call that oichel an avatuma, and that's a machlokes rishonim, it's only legabe other drinks. That if I'm called a rishon and I touch the liquid is a sheni. If I'm called an av and I touch the liquid is a rishon. But I'm not an avatuma when it comes to kelim. I'm not an avatuma when it comes to kelim. Or to put it like Chazal put it, in order to be able to become an avatuma, you have to be able to have tara in the mikveh. An oichel and a mashkin can't have tara, usually in a mikveh. Right? So mashkin could be an avatuma because of zav. But oichel could never be an avatum. So b'meila by truma, you have a bulka here and a bulka here. The bulk on the other side, the chal on the other side of the bowl doesn't get tameh. Yeah. Midirabanan. Oichel is not metame oichel midiraisa. Midirabanan oichel is metame oichel. Right. Right. Oichel can't be metame oichel. Oichel does not metame oichel, but it's metame mashke. And if you say it touched a mace, maybe it could be an av that the mashke becomes a rishon, but it's still not something that could be metame kelim. B'meila, the bulka was not metame the keli. Did it touch the other challah? It didn't. So therefore, the other challah is tar. That's a din by truma. By a kodesh, there's a din of keli mitzaref. Keli mitzaref is a fascinating halacha. I have one keli, I have one bulka that became tameh, but it's from a carbon. It's a carbon. Let's say it's the matzah that the koyanim baked from a nachas, or it's a piece of meat from a carbon, and it became tameh. A sheretz fell on it, and now there's another piece of meat on the other side of the tin. Because they're in one keli, the keli is mitzaref masha b'soichel lekodesh, that it's considered like one piece of meat. And because it's considered one piece of meat, just like if tumah touches one part of the meat, the other, just like if tumah touches my pinky, my whole goof is tameh. It's not, you don't, tumah is not compartmentalized. If it touches my nose, my entire organism, my entire body is tameh. If tumah touches one piece of meat, you don't say that piece is tameh, cut it off. The whole basar, the whole chaticha, is tameh. So even though here there's a separate piece of meat and they're not touching, they're not connected, nonetheless, the keli, the fact that they're in one vessel, that creates the tziruf. Because they're in one vessel, so the keli combines them to become one, as though they were not divisible, as though they were not two separate pieces, and therefore it's like the tumah touched also the second piece. Not because the second piece is touching the first piece, and then it would transfer it. Because then there would be a limit. Because let's say it's a sheretz that touches a piece of meat, and that piece of meat touches another piece of meat, right? So that piece of meat becomes a rishon. It touches another piece of meat, becomes a sheni. Touches another piece of meat, right? It becomes a shlishi. Touches another piece of meat, it becomes a revi. But if that piece of meat touches another piece of meat, it's nothing. There's no chamishi by karbanas. We're not saying here that it's like one piece of meat is touching another piece of meat, because then it would be limited. The vart is, it's mitzaref. Mitzaref is tziruf. It combines all the pieces of meat in the keli as though they were completely one. And therefore, the same tumah that the original piece of meat got from the sheretz, every other piece of meat in the keli gets. This is called the chiddush of keli mitzaref. It only exists in kodesh, not in truma. In truma, you don't say this. It's a fascinating halacha. You would think, this is my keli, huh? Huh? It's not so pasha what you say. It's not a joke. This is my keli. I have a bulka here, a bulka here. This bulka is not tameh. It's close to tumah, so what? If I go like this, I'm not tameh. I didn't touch it. So truma, you don't have the koyach to say keli mitzaref. By kodesh, we go back to the spiritual sensitivity of it. Even though they're in one keli, they're not touching each other. And the keli, remember, doesn't become tameh. It's not that the basar makes the keli tameh, and then the keli goes and is metame the other basar. That I don't have a problem with. If that would work, it would work with everything, not only truma, not only kabbanas, with chul and osa. But the keli doesn't become tameh from eichel. The keli is fine. Keli remains tar. If you take out this meat, the keli doesn't need to go to the mikveh. The keli is good. Remember, kelim cannot be mekabel tumah from eichel. Eichel will be mekabel tumah from keli, but not keli from eichel. What's the issue? The issue is that the keli, the fact that they're in one keli, it's mitzaref masha b'soiche, that lagabe kodesh, it's considered one chtich. Let's see how Rashi puts it. Rashi says, Dok va'ashkech behedya, the Amir Rabbi Akiva Revi v'lei chamish. Rabbi Ashi went out and he found that there's a source that Rabbi Akiva holds Revi. Why? Because the Mishnah says, Hakeli mitzaref masha b'soiche, areva arucha. Areva is like a big... like a kneading trough, right? Uba oichlei kodesh mikan va'oichlei kodesh mikan. On one side you have food of karbanos, on the other side ve'ei noigin zeh b'zeh, they're not touching. Ve'naga tamei ba'oichlei sheberoish echad, and the tamei touched oichel on one side of the trough. Ubekeli loy naga. The tumah did not touch the keli. That's the key. If the sheretz touched the keli, of course the other meat got tameh, because the keli is tameh. And the keli transferred tumah to the oichel. That's not what happened. The sheretz touched the food, not the keli. So you can't blame it on the keli. Food will never transfer tumah to kelim, even rabbinically. The food on both sides are tamei, because the keli combines them. That's what the Mishnah tells us. The keli combines them. In other words, the fact that they're in one vessel, the vessel unites them, and not only unites them, it's mitzarfam, it's not only mechabram, it's mitzarfam liyois chad. They become like one piece. Why? Since we're in the same if we're not in the same keli, we don't say this. There's a piece of meat here and a piece of meat here. They're not both tameh. But since they're in the same keli, so this is a special stringency by Kodesh that the keli makes them one. The question is this a rabbinic takana or is it a biblical takana? In other words, is it a biblical issue? The Gemara is going to discuss that in a moment. Okay, that we'll see in a moment. Okay. The Mishnah continues. Harivi b'kodesh pasal, v'hashlishi b'truma. The Mishnah continues that the Revi b'kodesh, a fourth level by kodesh becomes pasal, and shlishi by truma becomes pasal. In other words, the Mishnah is telling us that by kodesh truma goes till 4, and by truma goes till 3. And the word, of course, here is pasal. Why pasal? Because, as we learned a few times, when the Chazal wanted to represent something that becomes disqualified, but it can't transfer impurity to something else, they called it pasal. When it could transfer tumah, they called it tameh, and that's why they called Revi b'kodesh pasal and truma b'shlishi pasal, because it cannot transfer tumah to anything else that has the same level of kedusha. So if I have a truma that's a shlishi, even if it touches other truma, the other truma will not be contaminated. If I have a kodesh that's a revi and it touches other kodesh, the other kodesh will not be contaminated. It's called pasal. Okay, this is a Mishnah Masechta Chagiga. How does this come into our discussion? It says, whoa, let's see this Mishnah.
This thing is only by revi, by kodesh, not by the
One second. Ba'amar Reb Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Reb Chia, the son of Abba, said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, May Eidusa Shel Rabbi Akiva Nishnis Mishnah Zu. This Mishnah was studied, it was taught from the testimony of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yochanan taught that this Mishnah came from the Eidus, from something that was taught from a testimony of Rabbi Akiva. What are you talking about? Tanan, we learned the Mishnah Masechta Eidus. Perek Ches, the Mishnah says, Hoisif Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva added something. What did he add? We're going to explain in a moment. What did he add? Hasoilus. He added flour. Flour of menachos, flour of meal offerings in the Beis HaMikdash. What else did he add? He added v'haktoiris, the herbs that they used to use as incense that they would burn every morning and every afternoon in the Beis HaMikdash. What else did he add? Halavoina. Halavoina was what's called frankincense that was burnt with all of the meal offerings. What else did he add? Hagecholim. He added the coal. Which coal? Every single morning, they used to take coal from the external mizbeach in order to burn ketores on the inner altar. You had to have incense, but you have to pour hot coal on the incense for it to burn and create a smoke. So that coal they took from the outer altar where the karbonos were being burnt. So there was a lot of coal and ashes, and they brought those coals to the inner mizbeach where they would burn the ketores. So Rabbi Akiva says, all these things, flour, incense, the herbs, the frankincense, and the coals. If a tvul yom, somebody who was tummy and he went to the mikveh, but it's still the same day, night didn't happen, and he touched part of it, touched part of the coal, part of the ketores, part of the frankincense, part of the flour. He didn't touch the whole flour. Pasal is kulon, they all become disqualified. They all become pasal. That's what Rabbi Akiva taught us. This is a Mishnah and Eidius. What does this mean? What does this mean? What is Rabbi Akiva teaching us? A Tvul Yoim, we learned, is a Jew who was Tameh. Let's say he touched a sheretz. He went to the mikveh. He comes out of the mikveh. He can eat whatever he wants and nothing becomes Tameh because he came out of the mikveh. But that's only when it comes to Chulin. We learned that a Tvul Yoim, the Torah teaches us, he's not allowed to eat Truma. Truma is too sensitive, it's too holy. He has to wait for nightfall. Only nightfall can he eat Truma. The same is true with Karbonis. He can't eat Karbonis. And if he eats Truma or he eats Karbonis, he touches them. He disqualifies them. He makes them they have to be burnt. Why? Because he still has a little tumah. He still has a quasi-tumah. That's called a Tvul Yoim. The question is this. I'm a Tvul Yoim. And the Kohen has a shovel. And the Kohen has in that shovel coals. And those coals are being brought to the other side of the Beis HaMikdash. And I touch one of the coals. I touch one of them. I'm a Tvul Yoim. Okay. Or flour. Now flour is separated from particles. There's different parts of flour before you mix it with water, right? So he's taking flour from a nachas. It's karbonis, it's holy flour already. It was already mekudesh. It's not flour that was mundane. The flour is chulin, I'm allowed to touch it. It's not a problem, it's not tummy. This is flour that's holy. And I touch a part of the flour, a few particles, or one particle of flour. I didn't touch the other particles of flour. The same is true with frankincense, and the same is true with herbs. The ketores was made of different herbs, tzarit, tzipoirin, chelban, alavoina. I touch one of them or a few of them. Comes Rabbi Akiva and says, they're all puzzle. Every grain of flour, every particle of flour is separate. Every particle, every herb is separate. Comes Rabbi Akiva and teaches me, Keli mitzarev. This is the source. That's what the Brechana meant. Meidusay Rabbi Akiva nishnas mishnazu. The Mishnah in Chagigah, that by karbonis, a keli combines everything to be considered one. It comes from Rabbi Akiva's edus. Rabbi Akiva said that if I touch even one part of the ketores, one herb, all the ketores becomes disqualified to use in the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Why? I didn't touch it. The answer is because they're in one keli. Because they're in one keli, the fact that they're in one vessel, that unites them and combines them as though they're one Metzias. So therefore, even though I'm a Tvul Yoim and I touched only one gargir, one grain, one particle, everything else becomes puzzle. It's as though I touched all of it. That's what Rabbi Akiva tells me. Let's see Rashi. Rashi says, Be'edusai, al yidei edusai, Hoysif Rabbi Akiva be'edus, levoina v'gechalim. Afal gav dalav oichelinenu. 1 second, Rashi says, I have a whole other question. It's not food. We learned that only 4 things have become tameh. A person, kalim, utensils or garments, food, and drinks. This is not a food. Coal is not food. Nobody eats coal. Flour, you could say, is a food. Frankincense, herbs, some herbs are foods. Gecholim are not food. Levoin is not food. So Rashi, chibas hakodesh machshartan. This is a fascinating halacha. The love of kodesh, chibas hakodesh, the love of kodesh. Usually karbonis are food, so they're tamei on their own. But the love of kodesh machshartan makes them susceptible u'mashavilu oichel b'perek kol shah. Machshartan over here makes them susceptible. It makes them susceptible to tumah as though it was on oichel. In other words, levoina and gechalim of kodesh, soilas and ketores could be food. But even that which is not food, it's the chibas hakodesh that makes it oichel le'inyan tumah, as the Gemara, the Bryce explains later in Perek Kol Shah, and this is a unique chumrah that exists in items of the karbonis. If you remember, we learned I don't know if we discussed it, in the introduction to the whole sugya. The whole sugya, I don't know if we discussed it, but this comes up here in the Gemara, that when it comes to things in the Beis HaMikdash, even though you have things that are usually not mekabel tumah, like coals, they're not mekabel tumah. Let's see, on Daf Chaf, we'll discuss if it's Dairaisa or Rabbanan, okay? We'll discuss that. But the idea is there's something called Chibas HaKodesh. There's a special affection to these things, and that deems them like food. And therefore, they're susceptible to tumah. But what did Rabbi Akiva say? Even if you don't touch all of it, it all becomes tameh. This is the source for the Mishnah in Chagiga that the keli is mitzarev by kodesh.
How do you say which does flour?
It's not a suffix. That's the point. The keli is mitzarev. Whichever he did, I don't care. It's considered one. Who cares? What's the difference? Keli mitzarev. I don't understand your question.
Maybe because it's a suffix. Which
It's not a suffix. Keli mitzarev is not a suffix.
No, I said maybe the whole thing is.
Not maybe, for sure. Why is there a suffix?
You're saying the symbol, why you say that everything is tumah because you don't know which part you're talking.
No, that's not the vart.
You know
I told you.
which part you're talking.
You forgot what we learned before. If you have a keli and a piece of meat becomes tummy, the other piece of meat becomes tummy, even though you know he didn't touch it.
From where
The keli mitzaref. Where did the Mishnah learn a keli mitzaref? From this word of Rabbi Akiva. Verstehst? Verstehst nicht. It has nothing to do with suffix.
Why do you have this? Maybe did it because
Huh?
maybe did
Because Rabbi Akiva doesn't say if you don't know. Rabbi Akiva says even if you know. He touched one part of Ketores. Why is the other Ketores tummy?
Where's the regular repeal? What is this concept from?
Okay, we'll get to that. That's just we'll see that. Av Chaf.
Does this din apply to all killings? When we learned before, Klishara says a special din of the Avir. So, would this din have been started?
Yeah, any keli, any keli. Says the Gemara. 1 second.
Flour is so foreign that it's one piece, it's together.
But even if it's not,
Even if it doesn't touch each other.
but even if it's not, even if the particles are mamish separate, coals are certainly separate. You have a coal here and your coal here. Incense, herbs. You have an herb here and an herb here. They're separate. They're not touching. They're certainly not one. Nonetheless, it's as though he touched everything. The same Mishnah says keli mitzaref in Chagiga, and the Mishnah says right after that Revi in Chamishi loy. The Mishnah continued. Revi Chamishi not. Shlishi in for Truma, Shlishi Revi loy. In other, since the Mishnah in Chagiga that says keli mitzaref masha b'soicha l'kodesh is following Rabbi Akiva, so we're assuming that the next clause in the Mishnah, what was the next clause in the Mishnah? That Truma has a Shlishi and Kodesh has a Revi, is also following Rabbi Akiva. And from here we see Revi, yes, Chamishi not. It says that there's a Revi by Kodesh, it doesn't say there's a Chamishi by Kodesh. And again, it's a Shlishi ein, Revi loy. There's a Shlishi by Truma, there's no Revi by Truma. So this is the Mishnah from where Rava derived that Rabbi Akiva rejects the Kal V'chomer of Rabbi Yossi, and therefore he believes that Truma goes till Shlishi and Kodesh goes till Revi and not more. Okay? So we found a Mishnah that supports the premise of Rava that Rabbi Akiva does not believe Chamishi b'Kodesh, and therefore we assume Rabbi Akiva rejected the Kal V'chomer of Rabbi Yossi. Says the Gemara now. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Now let's see Rashi. Pasal is kulon. Rabbi Akiva said it's all pasal. Alma mitzaref keli masha b'soicha. We see from here Rabbi Akiva believes the keli is mitzaref. The imish from the nagi hadadi. If it's because they touched each other, like you said with the flour, nehida gacheles shenoga b'metame es chaverta. I could appreciate that the kol that got tame brought tumah to its friend, to the one near it. Aval chaverta sulay metamya, but the other kol won't get tame. Let's say a sheretz touched a kol, so the kol is a rishon. So the kol touches another kol, so it's a sheni. The kol touches a third kol, so it's a shlishi. It touches a fourth kol, so it's a revi. And what happens next? Dim ken avalei shishi ushvi at kuf. So now you'll have tumah that's 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10, all the way to 100. Nobody holds that. Umei oisei edis nishnis mishnah zuda keli mitzaref. And from that Mishnah, we learned, from that testimony of Rabbi Akiva, we learned this Mishnah keli mitzaref. Uktani behed revi b'kodesh pasal alma Rabbi Akiva chamishi leslei shlishi betruma in revi loy alma leslei Rabbi Akiva kal v'chomer Rabbi Yossi. So we see that Rabbi Akiva does not hold from the Kal V'chomer of Rabbi Yossi, and therefore Rabbi Akiva does not believe that there's a Chamishi b'Kodesh, there's only a Revi b'Kodesh and a Shlishi b'Truma. That's basically what Rava meant and what the Gemara says. Rabbi Akiva does not bring Tumah any further. Rashi says, fascinatingly, Beloshen Acher Shamati. I heard a different way of understanding this Gemara. However, yoyred le'imkei tahaim. This explanation goes down to the deepest layers of depths, v'i efshel lahamidoi, and I cannot establish it or explain it. I heard another way of explaining this Gemara, but it goes down le'imkei tahaim, which means to the depths of the abyss, v'i efshel lahamidoi, and there's no way of establishing it there. No way of maintaining this position. In other words, it's beyond complex and complicated, and there's no way of, Because Rabbi Akiva is the author of the Mishnah. The Mishnah that the Keli Mitzaref is following Rabbi Akiva. And the Mishnah continues, Revi b'Kodesh and Shlishi b'Truma. Right? So we're assuming if the first half of the Mishnah is following Rabbi Akiva, the second is also following Rabbi Akiva. Right? Because the whole source of Keli Mitzaref comes from Rabbi Akiva. And then you say Revi b'Kodesh. But Rabbi Akiva holds Chamishi b'Kodesh according to you. Unless you say it doesn't hold from the Kal V'chaim of Rabbi Yos. Says the Gemara, Alma, we see from here, Kasavar Tziruf de Rabbanon. That Rabbi Yochanan holds that Tziruf is a din de Rabbanon, not b'Daraisa. In other words, when Rabbi Yochanan told us that Hakeli Mitzaref comes from Rabbi Akiva, it means that he holds that Tziruf is the din de Rabbanon. The concept that a Keli could be Mitzaref everything to become one is a rabbinic stringency. It's not a din min HaTorah. In other words, the Rabbanan made a special chumrah by Karbonis because they wanted to be so sensitive to Karbonis, because they wanted to be so careful with Karbonis becoming Tameh, so they made this chumrah that if it's in one Keli, it becomes Tameh even if it didn't touch the original source of Tumah. Because they wanted to keep people very conscientious and very cautious not to be metame Karbonis. But it's only a din de Rabbanan, it's not a din de Torah. Like a geder offense. Alma kasavar tziruf de Rabbanan. Where do I see this? Pashat. Because where are we learning this halacha that Keli Mitzaref? From Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said that coals, all of the coal become tameh, all the silas becomes tameh, all the frankincense becomes tameh, all the Torahs becomes tameh. But this din of tumah we're going to see, according to Rabbi Akiva, is only a din de Rabbanan. It's called chibas hakodesh, like we said before. The love of kodesh makes it like oichel. That's only a rabbinic halacha. The din that chibas hakodesh, the love of kodesh, makes the eitzim, the wood or the Torahs, or the coal, the frankincense, become like oichel and be mekabel tumah, is l'chayra only midrabanan, because min HaTorah we have no source for it. Min HaTorah, if it's food, it becomes tameh, even though it's kodesh. Now, later Daf Lamed Hey, the Gemara brings a brisa that says this, and it brings it from a pasuk. Nonetheless, as Rashi says, it's only an asmach, it's only a support, but really it's only a din de Rabbanan. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva says this din where? He says it b'negeya tumah de Rabbanan. And since Rabbi Yochanan holds that the source of Tziruf Keli is from the testimony of Rabbi Akiva, which is talking about a Tumah de Rabbanan, it would seem that Rabbi Akiva holds that the whole din of Tziruf is only a din de Rabbanan. That's what Rashi says. Alma kasava Tziruf de Rabbanan. Milsa bam penafshi. This Gemara is a separate statement. It's not connected to before. Mida Amar Rabbi Yochanan, since Rabbi Yochanan said, Me'edusish Rabbi Akiva Nishnis, that the din of Keli Mitzaref you learn from the testimony of Rabbi Akiva. Alma, this shows us that Kasavar Rabbi Yochanan holds Tziruf de Keli lekodesh de Ktani gabe Mailas lav deiraisen ninu elam de Rabbanan. That Rabbi Yochanan, when Rabbi Yochanan said that what? That from this Mishnah came from the testimony of Rabbi Akiva, it means Rabbi Yochanan holds that the Tziruf of Keli by Kodesh, which is one of the Mailas, one of the stringencies, one of the elevated halachas by karbanas that don't exist by truma, is not biblical. Ela midrabanan me'edusah Rabbi Akiva de midrabananu, because you're learning it from the edus of Rabbi Akiva. But the edus of Rabbi Akiva is talking about a tumah derabanan. The gechalim u'levayna lav b'nei kibuli tumaninu ela midrabanan. V'afal gav the amar mar v'habasal l'rabes eitzim u'levayna amrinam b'kol shah the ma'ila midrabanani. Even though later in Pesachim there's a source from the pasuk that even eitzim and levina, frankincense and lumber can become tummy in the Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara says over there it's still only a chumna b'dirabbanan, which they have an asmachta support from a pasuk v'hab basar, but nonetheless it's be'etzim adin dirabbanan. So from here we learn that Rabbi Yochanan knows that the din of keli mitzaref is only dirabbanan. Why? Again, the source of it is from the testimony of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was talking about coals. Coals is only a tumah dirabbanan, not a tumah d'oraisa. And Rabbi Akiva says it in that case. He says it in that case, that over that case, the keli is mitzarev the tumah. But that's tumah only because of a din dirabbanan that it's like oichel. And since Rabbi Yochanan holds that the whole source of tziruf keli is from the testimony of Rabbi Akiva, which only is talking about a tumah dirabbanan, so this proves that he holds that the din of tziruf is only dirabbanan. Because if he would hold that the din of tziruf is d'oraisa, then you wouldn't be able to learn it from Rabbi Akiva's halacha. Because Rabbi Akiva is only talking about something that's tumah dirabbanan. How do you know that by d'oraisa it also works? Maybe tumah d'oraisa doesn't work. It's talking about something that's tumah dirabbanan. Over there, Rabbi Akiva says keli mitzaref. So when you're learning that halacha, it means you learn that keli mitzaref is only a din dirabbanan, because Rabbi Akiva was talking about a tumah dirabbanan. It wouldn't be able to be a din in d'oraisa. You can't say one kol makes another kol tameh midoraisa because the keli is mitzaref when the whole tumah of the kol is only midrabbanan. The original kol is also only midrabbanan. So how can it be? Let's say keli mitzaref is midoraisa, but it wasn't tameh to be mitzaref it. So from there, at best, you could learn that what? That siruf works mitzad rabbanon, not mitzad raisa. And Rabbi Yochanan holds that's the only source of keli mitzaref, because Rabbi Yochanan holds that keli mitzaref is a din rabbanon. Upliga de Reb Chanan, he argues with Reb Chanan. The Amar Reb Chanan says tziruf de raisa. The din of keli mitzaref is a biblical din. Shenamar, the pasuk says, fascinating limud parshas kit nasai. Kaf achas asara zov malay ekteres hakasuv asa kol masha bekaf achas. If you remember the offerings of the Nesiim, the leaders of the Shvatim, they brought when the Mishkan was renewed, when the Mishkan was built, from Rosh Chodesh Nisan for the next 12 days, every day one leader from a Shevet brought a carbon, right? First day was Yehuda, Nachshon ben Aminadav, every day another Nasi brought. Parshas Nasai. So what's the Lashon over there? That B'yoyim Rishon, right? Let's say Nasi Livnei Yehuda, Hikriv es Karbonai, Kara Achas, a bowl, Shloishim Omeya Mishkala, it weighed 130 silver shekel, Mizruk Echad Kesef, Shivim Shekel B'Shekel HaKodesh, a spoon of silver, Shneim Aleim Soilas, the bowl and the spoon were filled with flour, Blula Bashem and Lemincha, mixed with oil for a mincha. Kaf Achas, one spoon, Asara Zahav, which weighed 10 shekel of gold, Melea Ktoiris, the spoon was filled with ktoiris, filled with incense, with herbs that would be burnt. The question is, kaf is singular. Kaf is a spoon. It doesn't say kapois. Kapois is plural. Kaf is one. So why say achas? It should say kaf. Kaf is one. It doesn't say kapois. Kaf, asarazov. So Reb Chanan says, hakos of asa kol masha bekaf achas. Fascinating. This is a halacha. The halacha is, if it's in one kaf, it becomes achas. Not that the kaf was achas. I know that a kaf is achas. The chiddush is, if it's in one spoon, kaf, it's a spoon, and I want to tell you a halacha, achas. Anything that's in one spoon is considered achas. It's considered one. And therefore, all the particles of ktoiris, all the different herbs in the kaf, are considered one, like one entity. And this is talking about kodesh, it's not truma. They didn't bring truma to the Beis HaMikdash. This was a carbon that would be offered on the Mizbeach. So from here, Reb Chanan learned a new halacha, that when it comes to karbonos, kodesh, not truma, the keli is mitzaref, everything in it to become one entity. And therefore, if I have a keli and one piece of meat on one side, another piece of meat on the other side, and a tummy touches one piece of meat, the other piece of meat becomes tummy, as though it was mamish one entity with the first piece of meat, because they're in one keli. That's the machlokas. Rabbi Yochanan holds the din of tziruf is only rabbinic. Reb Chanan holds it's a biblical halacha, kaf achas, hakosov asa kol masha b'kav achas. Rashi says, upliga de Rabbi Yochanan ad Reb Chanan, kaf achas, b'ktoides ksiv de koideshum. Asher lechein tziruf would be a din min ha-Torah, and because it would be a din min ha-Torah, therefore we understand that it doesn't apply to truma, because truma is not the same case. Truma is not karbonos. By truma, you don't have a din of kaf achas just because I'm in one keli, so therefore I'm one. It's not true. Yeah, it's not true. It doesn't work that way. You need a special limud. Just because I'm in the same bowl and you got tummy, it's not my problem. I'm not tummy. The chiddush by karbonos is it's kaf achas asara zav malayik tayros.
Only by the carbon?
Everybody holds it's only by karbonos. Hakeli mitzaref es masha b'soichel lekiddush avaloy
Why
l'trum.
does it learn from the Torah only by carbon?
So my ketores. Ketores kaf achas asara zav malayik. Rashi says ketores ksiv the koydeshu. Look at Rashi. But ketores ksiv the koydeshu. Ketores is not truma. They weren't bringing truma to a kohen. They were bringing herbs, incense that would be burnt on the mizbeach. This is a carbon. It was mekadosh. It was nikdash b'klei sharis. These kalim were kadosh and they were mekadosh. It was a gather of kodesh, and the gather of kodesh has a special din of tumah. What's the din of tumah? The din of keli mitzaref.
So clay shards would not be, would just be a clay.
Any keli, even a keli of chulin.
How do you make what I'm saying on the clay? Rashi says here it has to be a clay kodesh.
No. The ketores is kodesh. Any vessel in which you have two pieces of karbonos, of sacred meat or sacred items of karbonos, the vessel unites them.
How do you get a case where you have two pieces of kodesh and something that is also not a clay kodesh?
Simple. I'm eating the carbon pesach, right? And I have a big bowl, a big plate, and I put one piece of lamb in the corner of the plate and another piece.
We're talking about Taurus here in the clay kodesh.
Yeah.
And then it's
The
stored-
ketores was in a spoon,
Right.
so even though one part of
What's that
ketores,
spoon- What's that spoon made out of is my question.
no difference.
So it could be any kind.
It happens to be it was gold,
Yeah, it happens to be, but I'm saying.
but no difference.
Then
Torah was always
you wouldn't have it. You wouldn't have it in any other kind of.
You're right.
outside
You're right.
the-
You're right.
So, but it extends that. Then
Yeah.
extends to the
Yeah.
clay.
That a keli is mitzaref anything that's in it lekodesh and not
Even
letruma.
though we learned it from a clay kodesh.
Right. Even though we learn it from a case of zahav in the case of the basic mishkan when the Nesiim brought it. But it's a gilui milsa. Why would the Torah have to add the word achas to teach me? I know it's a kaf achas. If it's a kaf, it's achas, right? The answer is to teach me if it's in a kaf, it becomes achas. It's a new din. It's a fascinating din. The superfluous word achas teaches me a new halacha. Anything that's in a kaf, and we extend it to any keli, because there's no logic to say it's a spoon but not a bowl. It's a spoon but not a goblet. It's a spoon.
No, I was asking about the
Right, I got it,
the
yeah.
substance of it. A wood keli, for example.
Right.
Or an earthenware vessel would be the same din.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't say kaf zaha. It says kaf.
No, but
It's
the
any kaf.
example is of a kaf zana. So we have to learn.
Yes.
So how would I know?
Binyanav. That's what we do. Paradigm. Prototype. In other words, we don't have a reason logically to say gold, yeah, silver, not. Because we're looking at the Nakuda. The Nakuda is that the Keli unites them. The fact that they're in one vessel, meaning, let's put it this way, they're being brought, why are they in one vessel? One vessel means there is some unity between them. So even though they're not unified, and by Truma it's not going to help, but the subtle unity that does exist between them, the fact that they're in one vessel, that is enough to create a complete unity to the point that every piece is considered like the other piece, as one with the other piece, and therefore it all becomes tameh. That's the halacha. I want to, for a moment, explore this halacha, which is a fascinating halacha, from a spiritual perspective, which is discussed in Svarim, which gives it also a certain richness and level of depth. Lamaskana, we have no chamishi b'kodesh. We have only revi. Even Rabbi Akiva, there's no chamishi. So this means as follows: Chulin could become a sheni, right? Meiser sheni could become a sheni, but not a shlishi. Truma can be a shlishi. Kodesh can be a revi. But nothing can be more than that. There's nothing more than that. Okay. Now this is Pashat al pi halacha, al pi nigla. But it's not these numbers are not a coincidence. There are four worlds. There's the world of Asiya, there's the world of Yitzira, there's the world of Bria, there's the world of Atzilus. The world of Asiya is our world. It's a very physical, fragmented world where God is not visible at all. The world of Yitzira is a much more delicate world. It's much more spiritual, much more sensitive. We learned in the Maimarim that in Yitzira, right, 15 years is one day. Time becomes condensed. Bria is a much higher world. The world of Atzilus is considered the highest universe in terms of oneness. It's called Olam HaAchdus. It's a world in which the oneness of godliness is completely experienced. Chulin, mundane foods, is basically a product of our world where everything is chayil, mundane. Meiser Sheni has holiness in it. It's a higher level, right? A Tvul Yom can still eat Meiser Sheni. You're not allowed to eat Meiser Sheni betuma. Chulin, you can eat betuma as much as you want. I can eat all chulin that's tumah. It's not a problem. You're allowed to drink and eat all tumah. Anybody could. The Rabbanan said if you eat food that's tumah or drinks that's tumah, you become a sheni l'tumah. If you're a kohen, it can be a problem if you touch truma. But it's not an issue. You can eat chulin betuma. Chulin represents the world of Asiya. Meiser Sheni, which you're not allowed to eat betuma, represents the world of Yitzira, which is a much more holy world. But a Tful Yom touches Meiser Sheni, it's not a problem. Truma is mamish holy food. Over there goes to Shlishi. Shlishi represents yet a higher world, the third world, which means it's so sensitive. It's so sensitive because it's from the world of Bria. It's a much more sacred world. So therefore, even a very, very little tumah called Shlishi will still disqualify it. Chulin doesn't even feel it. What's called corruption in our world, right, is for sure corruption in a higher world, but it doesn't work the other way. The Gemara says in Yuma, Heichi dami chilul Hashem. Yeah? Rav said if I go into the butcher and I take on credit, it's called a chilul Hashem. Why is it called a chilul Hashem? Because the standards are different. So what's corruption in a higher world in this world is nothing. What's called tumah in a higher world in this world is not called tumah. So in a higher world, in the world of truma, which is the world of bria, something that's not in chulin, it's not tumah. In Meiser Sheni, it's not tumah. It's nothing. It's pure. But in a higher world, this little tiny, invisible element of tumah is completely conspicuous and it's very sensitive because it's a whole different energy. But that's when it comes to truma. When it comes to kodesh, that's revi. Revi is the olam ha'atzilus. It's the highest world, the fourth world. Over there, the levels of tumah are much, much more severe. Because even something which for truma is not tumah at all, like revi, truma doesn't pick up the tumah. This is not called tumah. In the world of atzilus, lo yigur chara tahore nayim merois bera. It's so sensitive. It's so delicate. We learned once in a Maimah that the Mezritcha Maggid said that the machshavas zoros of tzaddikim create a bigger b'gam than averis of rishayim. Right? Machshavas zoros of tzaddikim, subtle thoughts of a tzaddik that are negative, could create a greater blemish than averis of rishayim. Why? Because it's so subtle, it's so deep, and it affects a much deeper place. So even though visibly it's not a big deal, but that's the point. It creates an infection in a much deeper place, even though it's not visible. It's like nuclear energy. So as a result of that, Revi becomes possible in a way that Shlishi will not is a whole different level. Truma is not vulnerable. It's fine. The world of Bria, the world of Atzilus, it's a tzaddikim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu medaktik aleim kechut hasayra. The Chazal say tzaddikim, Hashem is makbid even a little thing. It's not the pshat he gets tough. It means when you're so holy, a little blemish for somebody else it's not noticeable. But for him, it creates a disaster. You know, when your body is very sensitive, yeah, you eat one thing that's toxic and you're sick. Another guy can eat it all day and he doesn't feel it. Why? because his whole system is shattered. It doesn't make a difference. Min b'mina yeina chaytzitz. Rabbi Akiva, chulin is much. Chulin goes till Shlishi. You're right. Chulin goes to Shlishi, and Kodesh goes to Revi, according to Rabbi Akiva. Well, halacha we say chulin is Sheni, Meiser Sheni is Sheni, right? Shlishi is Truma, and Revi is Kodesh. And over there's a level of Tumah that Truma will not be sensitive to. But here we learn a new vart. Hakeli mitzaref masha b'soichei l'kodesh avaloi l'truma. Because Atzilus is the world of Achdus. What's the world of Achdus? The world of Achdus is a world in which everything is really one. Because in the world of Atzilus, everything is one. Because Hashem is everything. And Hashem is oneness. But in the physical world, it's not that way. I am I, and you are you. So you have, let's say, talking to Jewish people. We have our Keli. What's the Keli? The Keli is the Guf. The Neshama is in the Guf, in the Keli. So I have my life, you have your life. But that's only from a superficial perspective. When you're Megala, the level of Kodesh, when you're talking on the level of Kodesh, on a much deeper level of consciousness, then, if it's in one Keli, if there's any element of unity, if the Keli says we're together in one Keli, it's Mitzarif, it reveals that it's all one. In other things, it doesn't happen because they're still separate. Either in one Keli, you're on this side of the Keli, I'm on this side of the Keli, so we're not one. But when it comes to Kodesh, what's Kodesh? Kodesh represents that which comes from a place where there is more holiness and therefore more unity, because whenever there's more holiness, there's more unity. Because whenever the godliness of something is more revealed, so you see the unity of everything, because everything is really one. Achdus Hashem, Efes Zulasa, Einoid Mulvadai. So therefore, you're also much more sensitive to Tumah. Things that in another world are not affecting you are going to affect you because you're a level of Revi. Revi is nothing, it's so little. You're right, in the world of Truma, it's nothing. In the world of Kodesh, it's everything. It makes it possible. Can't eat it anymore. So I'm allergic to it. I'm not holy. For me to be holy on the level of Kodesh, you have to maintain a certain level of purity that others don't have to maintain, because it's much, much more sensitive. You have to know who you are. If you're a shtickle Truma, you have to be sensitive to Shlishi. If you're a shtickle Kodesh, you have to be sensitive to Revi. And because of that, the level of unity is a different level of unity. That even though I'm not touching you, so if I'm not touching you, why should I be affected by you? But that's only if you look on Olam HaSiyah, Olam HaYitzira, Olam HaBriya. If I'm not touching you, I'm not you. In the world of Atzilus, it doesn't work that way. Even if I may be not touching you physically, we are completely one. Why are we completely one? Because the Keli is Mitzar. If there's no Keli at all, so then that level of unity is not translated into the physical world, because you're there and I'm there, even though in truth everything is one. But we're talking here in the physical world of halachas of Tumah and Tara. But if there's already a Keli, meaning there is a vessel that unites us, we are in the same vessel, we're in the same Keli. For Truma, that's not enough to make it one. It's not one, separate. But for Kodesh, just being in one Keli is enough in order to make it as though it's mamash one. Because since Kodesh is so much more divine, so therefore the oneness is much more powerful. So even the most subtle, smallest unity, like the unity in a Keli, is already considered achas. That's what the pasuk teaches us. Kaf, if you're dealing with k'tairis, so kaf, if it's a spoon, it's already achas. Hakosov asa kol ma shebekaf achas. The Torah redefines, even though it's two separate pieces, the Torah doesn't see it as two separate pieces. From a deeper perspective, the two separate pieces are one. As long as they're in one Keli, there is something that unites them. The fact that we're connected on some level. So in this level of Revi, it becomes one. And that's the connection in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Hakeli mitzaref kol ma shebesaychel lekodesh avalei letruma. Then right after that it says, by kodesh there's Revi, by truma there's shlishi. What's the connection? So for us it was very useful, because it taught us that Rabbi Akiva holds is only a Revi. But in Teichen it's really the same thing. Because Kodesh, the Tumah reaches till Revi. Why does it reach till Revi? Because it comes from the Olam HaAchdus, the Olam of Revi, the Olam of Atzilus. So therefore there could be a level of Achdus that doesn't exist in Truma. Because Truma only goes till Shlishi, because it's Olam HaBriya, it's not Olam HaAchdus. But Olam HaAtzilus is Olam HaAchdus. So therefore, the moment in this world you reveal that we're in one Keli, we have one function, we have one purpose, we're part of one story, it becomes not just connected, not just touching. Rashi says it's not touching. Touching is not enough. Touching would be 10, 100, 1,000, it's not enough. You need it to be mitzurif. Mitzurif means what? As though it's one piece mamish, but it's not one piece. So you have here a fascinating halacha in Nigla. I have a piece of meat here and a piece of meat here. It's a big tray. And these two pieces of meat are considered that they're one piece of meat. They're not one piece of meat. They are one piece of meat. Why are they one piece of meat? Because Kodesh goes till Revi. Because Kodesh goes till Revi, so Mela, the tziruf is one. And you have it also in Avodas Hashem, between a Jew. You have a Jew on one side of the world, a Jew on another side of the world. You have on two sides of the table, or sitting near each other. They're not one, they're not even touching. You may even say, you don't touch me, I don't touch you, I don't affect you. That's only if you have the perspective of Asiyah, if you have the perspective of Yitzir, if you have the perspective of Bria. If you go to a deeper perspective, a deeper place, where you could see things that are invisible, which is the concept of Tumah. Tumah means things that are invisible, like germs, like bacteria. They didn't acknowledge this, right? But the higher you go, the things that are invisible in one world become visible in another world. We all understand that. Things that you don't see under a microscope, right? Shatnez. You could look at it, there's no linen. But the guy in Shatnez takes a microscope and suddenly he sees linen fibers because it becomes more visible. The higher you go, invisible things become visible. They become important, they become significant because there's more sensitivity. And therefore, the higher you go, the deeper you go, you see not only they touch each other, that's not mela, they become mamish one. The fact that we're in one keli, it makes it mamish one. The emes also. But you understood the answer to your shaila. So nicht a suffix. Huh? So nicht mit a suffix. The Bakiva sagt nicht mit a suffix. I feel like weiß. I know which one he touched. It's not mit a suffix. Because it's considered as though it's one Metzias. Not because I don't know which one he touched. If it's chulin, there's no issue. Even if it's truma, it's no issue. If it's a dough, if you kneaded the flour into water and it became a dough, then it's one Metzias. It's like a piece of bread. If you touch one part of the bread, the whole bread becomes tameh. But if it's another piece of bread, or it's another particle of flour, it's not tameh. If it's touching, you're right. If you could, you could. If not, not. Even let's say you have two piles of flour, and I touch one pile of flour, the other pile of flour is not going to become, right? And even if it's not a pile, it's a particle of flour. If it's touching another particle, but it's separate, so the other particle will become tummy because it's touching it. But it's not going to bring it to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. Here the vart is that it's not negeya. Even if they're not touching, they're mamish different piles. They're considered echad mamish. It's like one mamish, one metzias. You understand? That's a big chiddush, hakeli mitzaref. Physically, it's a funny thing. The tumah touched here, and this guy is tumah. If they would be out of the keli, no, nothing would happen. If it would be truma, nothing would happen. If it would be chulin, nothing would happen. Because it's karbonis, so suddenly this one became tameh, even though he's far away. That's a truma not.
Why not?
That's what he says. A keli mitzaref masha b'soichel lekodesh avaloy letruma.
No, about keli.
Yeah, a keli is not mitzaref by truma.
Like over here. Truma.
If I'm a kohen and I have a challah that's truma, and a sheretz falls on the challah, and I have another challah in the same keli, it's not tameh. If it's one thing, if it's one entity, yeah. If it's one piece of meat, yeah. If it's one apple. Take an apple. Take two apples.
I'm speaking about flour. Very small, and you can't say which one it touches. Like I have a small pile of.
So you may have a din of suffix. That could be a problem of suffix. You don't know which he touched. But let's say you would know. Let's say there's two piles of flour in a keli. The other pile wouldn't get tameh.
If I touch a small part of it, I'll set the whole pile of flour.
Als negiya could be it touched it. I touch one particle of flour and that touches something else, so that tumah could travel. But at some point it's going to stop traveling. Here the vart is it's not traveling. It's considered echad. You understand? With flour, it's harder to distinguish. Take two apples. There's an apple here and an apple there. The apple is not going to become tummy because there's another apple tummy. But by carbonus, a piece of meat here and a piece of meat here, even though they're not connected, they're not from one animal even. But that's the chiddush that the keli is mitzadaf. It's a unique chiddush by carbonus. Kaf achas. Whatever is in the kaf is achas. Loit Reb Chanan, loit Reb Yochanan, it's a din derabanan. It's not a din derais. But azay or azay, the keli makes it one. Midirabanan or midiraisa. A table not. You need a keli. A keli, yeah. You need a keli that's mitzadaf. They're in one keli. You need a vessel.
Yeah.
If it's a cavity, there's a cavity. Yeah.
Tray is called a cake.
A counter is not. You want to know if it's on one counter, if it's mitzadaf it? I don't think so.
It's not pshat the avir. It's the fact that they're laying on the same. It's not the avir.
It's not in the same house. That's too much oil. That's something else. The fact they're in the same house doesn't do the trick. It's not in the same house.
Same room.
Or the same room. You don't say if it's on the same room. You don't say that. You don't say that. You say
Kaf has to be a keli.
a kaf. It has to be like a spoon. Kaf is a spoon.
Something that's
A mizruk. I said mizruk is a spoon. Mizruk is a bowl. Kaf is a spoon.
You said it correct.
I said mizruk a bowl. I don't remember.
Yeah, you said it correct.
Okay. It has to be a spoon. It could be a huge spoon. A small spoon has to be a spoon. That's
Keli has
keli mitzaref masha b'soichel the kodesh and v'loy the truma. Because that level of tziruf could only exist by kodesh. It doesn't exist in truma. You don't have that level of tziruf. You can't. It's too separate.
So the one that learns the Rabbanon, how does he treat this possible?
I guess what he would say is that the kaf achas is an asmachta, meaning it's a. You mean why it says achas?
No,
Why-
yeah,
what does he do with the achas?
What does it do with achas?
L'chayra achas is superfluous.
Yeah.
How does Rabbi Yochanan deal with the achas? L'chayra achas is superfluous.
Huh?
one always follows out. It's like,
No, but it has to
most
be
of the time
logical all
someone
the
learns
way.
me, how did the other one do it?
Has to
Yeah,
logic.
but it
It has to be
doesn't
logical all the way.
ask it, you know what I'm saying?
Especially if he learns that it's the Rabbanon. So if it's the Rabbanon, so what do you do with achas? What do you learn? Another law?
Mm-hmm.
If it is, so what it is. So you must use achas for something else. Also, the Rabbanon is no, the Rabbanon is also a shvach ha'maisa because it's like a union of gather. Why dafka here? Why not batruma? You can make a gather a little bit tradition. You make a gather batruma, make the same gather. No, so the Rabbanon is actually shvach ha'maisa.
People learn says two cups are touching each other. It's tummy here, doesn't become tummy there. It must be just whatever's in one cup. What happens if
No,
they're
but
touching?
that's
What
the
happens
question.
if the two
That's
cups
the
and-
question. Oh,
What
that's
happens
the
if the
question.
two spoons are touching each other?
Okay, so
Does
let's-
tummy here become tummy here by touching? I don't know.
So that's the
What?
question. I mean, what does it do with achas? I always had this question: why also another thing? Why when they see him, it always repeats the same thing? It's like I'm sure there is some. It's loaded. Why? Because it's the same thing. It's
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
same thing over and over 12 times.
For volunteer, it's very difficult to use.
It's for
When he starts.
Baal Shemeh, it's much
Very
more difficult.
Basically once, maybe we wouldn't be counting all the food anyway.
No, but
The touches, you see. It's not.
no, but the question is, what does he use this for?
I don't know. It's a good order. Why? How he learns the achas? You're saying. Okay, you have to be ma'ayin in it.
If the cup touches another cup, it's not.
No, a keli.
Anyway, so I'm saying because even if
A
it
keli
touches,
is
it would
usually
be-
not metame another keli,
Right.
unless the keli is an avatuma. A keli could become an avatuma. Remember, if a keli touches a mace,
If it's a
halal cherev. You remember,
Yeah, yeah.
hareyu kameis.
Right, right.
So a keli could become an avatuma.
But the
Right, 'cause I
spoon,
was thinking,
Whether it's only clay matchis or all kalim besides clay cheres is a machlaikas, but at least some kalim could be an avatuma according to everybody. For sure, like a sword, a metal keli.
Right, right.
So a mela, that keli could be metame another keli because it's an avatuma. But oichel can't be an avatuma.
Because I was thinking kafachis is only in this one. If it touches, it's not going to become no.
Depends what level of tumma it is. You're right. If the,
I'm
I'm saying if the keli touched the sheretz, then right, so then the keli is a rishon. If it's a rishon, it won't be metame another keli, because a keli can only be metame from an avatuma. So usually kalim will not be metame other kalim. Very rare. But if a keli is an avatuma, it'll be metame other kalim.
it's very hard to find a golden spoon that you can kill with. You can feed with it, but not to kill.
Lamadavinan.